If you need to color correct your video in Premiere and you've got no idea where to start, this episode's for you.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Hi, and welcome to DIY Film with Merle Becker, the channel where I help you make better videos. Stick around to the end of the video for today's bonus filmmaking tip. For those of you who need to jump right to the tutorial, you can skip to 3 minutes into this video. For the rest, the first few minutes of this video contains information that'll help you understand what we're doing a little bit better. Okay, so you've finished shooting and editing your piece, and now your last step is to color correct and then color grade. Or is that the same thing? Let's talk about the difference between color correction and color grading. There is a difference. Color correction is the process of adjusting the color, contrast, and exposure of the video so that it looks natural, as if you were standing right there in the scene looking at it in real life. Color grading is used in addition to color correction, and it comes after it. It's the process of stylizing the video to give it a certain look by adjusting the colors. Some color-graded pieces have a bluish tint to make the movie feel more mysterious or serious. Or some color-graded pieces have a more orange or warm tint, making the movie feel more friendly or inviting. So, to put it simply, color correction is more of a technical process and color grading is more of a creative one. So, the question is, do you always need to color correct? The short answer is yes. Ideally, you got perfect white balance and exposure when you shot the footage. But in reality, this is impossible. It always needs tweaking when you get it into the edit. Plus, some cinematographers shoot in a flat or log picture profile to preserve dynamic range and tonality with a plan to do an involved color correct pass in post. But yeah, you almost always need to do one. Also, before we dive in, now's a good time to quickly mention that before you shoot anything, you should always white balance your camera and check your histogram to make sure you're getting the correct exposure. If you do these two things during the shoot, you'll have less work to do when you color correct. I'll do a video at some point showing you how to do both. And also, I should mention that there is no one right way to color correct. Color correcting is a combination of using scopes to get your color and exposure within the proper range and using your judgment to make your footage look as realistic as possible. People have different ways of going about it, and what I'm going to show you is just one way to approach it. I'm also just going to do a basic correction, but you can get really detailed with this, and once you've been doing it for a while, you might want to take it to the next level. Also, I should mention, no one color correction setting is going to work for all your clips. You really have to go through each and every shot and adjust them individually. And lastly, whenever you're color correcting, you should always be looking at your scopes in addition to your footage as you adjust. Not only do you need to know that your levels are falling within broadcast safe, and it's impossible to know this without scopes, but your eyes and your monitor won't give you an accurate representation of your image, even if you have an expensive color accurate monitor. With that in mind, let's start by opening the Lumetri Color panel and the Lumetri Scopes panel by going to Window, Lumetri Scopes, and the same for Color. The Color panel here is where we'll make our adjustments. And the Lumetri Scopes panel is where you'll find your scopes that you should be watching. I'll stick a clip in my timeline so we can see something registering on the scopes. So now you have some scopes. The three that we want are the RGB Parade, the Vectorscope YUV, and the Luma Waveform. Lastly, let's change the waveform type to Luma if it's not already by going to the wrench, Waveform Type, and Luma. Alright, now we're ready to rock. So let's talk about what each of these scopes does. First, let's look at the waveform. The waveform measures your exposure, or brightness. On the left is the IRE scale. On the top is where you'll find your whites represented, and on the bottom is the blacks. When you're looking at the waveform, you don't ever want to see your whites go above 100. If your image is going above 100 or below 0, you'll get what's called clipping, which means that you're losing information. To illustrate, if I take a look at this overexposed flower image, you can see that there's information in the image that isn't showing up right here. I know we're supposed to be seeing something in this area, and we're not. And you can confirm on the waveform that there's clipping because you can see this flat line at the top. Speaking very generally, you want things to be kind of spread out evenly here, with not all the highlights, midtones, and shadows at the top, and vice versa. You can see when I drag my highlights, midtones, and shadows in such a way that my image looks washed out, we see the signal hovering by the top, indicating that there's too much white and not enough black in my image. All right, let's take a look at the Vectorscope now. The Vectorscope measures colors, namely hue and saturation. You want your colors to be expanded beyond a little dot in the center, but not beyond this circle here, which is the broadcast safe cutoff. So, for example, if I take my flower image and decrease the saturation all the way to remove all the color, I can confirm on the Vectorscope that there is no color in the image because it's just a little dot in the center, and the lines aren't expanding outward towards the color boxes. But if I increase the saturation to add more color, the lines start moving outward. But you want to stop before you go beyond this circle. Also on the Vectorscope, with regards to hue, each of these little boxes represents a color. And something that's properly color balanced will have the points fall within the boxes. So let's load some color bars in the timeline to illustrate. Color bars, for those who don't know, is a standard image used in broadcast for color calibration. When an image has correct hue and saturation, the Vectorscope will show each color point resting right inside the boxes here. And this color bars image shows just that, the points are in the boxes. But if I adjust the tint, they start to move out of the boxes. And you can see the image is not looking like color bars are supposed to look either. And then lastly, we have the RGB Parade, which separates out red, green, and blue, and tells you how much of each color you have in your image. Ideally, you don't want one of these to be much higher than the others. So let's take a look at this bluish flower image that wasn't white balanced properly. To the naked eye, it looks a bit blue. And if I look at the RGB Parade, I can confirm that it indeed has more blue than the other colors. The blue bar is higher than the other two. Alright, so using our eyes in these three scopes, we're going to get your footage properly color corrected. So I like to adjust things in this order: color, then exposure. And if you forget this order, Adobe has presumably put everything in the order they think you should go in. So you can roughly move from the top to the bottom of the Lumetri Color panel. I should also mention, while we're talking about the color panel, if your image starts looking like garbage and you just want to completely start over, you can click this little undo arrow here to set everything back to where you began. So let's start with color. I'm going to work on this orangish image of flowers here, which wasn't properly white balanced when it was shot. One of the easiest ways to begin getting the color where it should be is to use this little white balance selector here and click on something that's supposed to be white in your image. This is only the first step though, and it should just be used to get you started. So this flower image was shot against a white background, so I can just select the background and voila, it brings me closer to having correct colors. It still looks a little dingy though. You can see the background isn't really a true white, and overall the image is looking a bit dark. If we look at the Vectorscope, we can confirm the points are a bit closer to the boxes, but we still have a little more work to do to get them lined up. So I'll slide the temperature down a bit, and we can see the Vectorscope shifts so that the white is moving a little closer to the middle. And say you don't have anything white in your image, in this case, to get started, you can just look at your image and then at your Vectorscope and adjust first the temperature and then the tint until the whites are resting towards the center of the wheel. You can also confirm your choice by looking at the RGB Parade. The red, green, and blue should all be roughly the same height. So once you have the color for your clip in the right place, you want to move on to exposure. Lumetri Color has an overall exposure slider, which is okay if you have a big sweeping change you have to make, but I generally don't recommend this. You want to isolate your highlights and your shadows separately to get the best looking result. So I take a look at my image and push things a bit depending on whether I think it should be darker or lighter, and I confirm my choices with the waveform. So I'll push my highlights up a bit and my whites as well. And you can see the image is looking brighter, and our whites are around 90 on the Luma Waveform. Remember, we want to adjust so that your waveform is kind of evenly spaced, with highlights in roughly the 70 to 90 range, shadows under that in roughly the 40 to 70 range, and your darkest parts or blacks in roughly the 0 to 20 range, and of course not below 0. There, my shot is looking much better now. One way to quickly see how far you've come is to toggle this little FX at the top here to turn the effect on and off. So once you have your color and your exposure under control, the very last step is to micro adjust the contrast and the saturation to make things pop a bit more. First, push the contrast a little, confirming on the scopes that you're still within legal range. And lastly, inch up the saturation, watching that Vectorscope to make sure you're still within the broadcast safe circle. In this case, I don't want to really touch it that much because we're really close to that circle. And of course, you always want to watch your image to make sure it's not starting to look really unnatural. All right, so I think we've done a pretty decent job of bringing these dingy dark flowers back to life. And that, my friends, is about it. So now you want to go through each and every shot and do this. The good news is that you can copy your Lumetri effect and paste it onto the next shot. You do this by going to the Effect palette, clicking on the Lumetri Color effect, and hitting Command-C on a Mac or Control-C on a PC. Then, to paste it on another clip, you hit Command-V on a Mac or Control-V on a PC. That being said, you're still going to have to go in and adjust things for each and every shot, especially if it's from a different camera. Okay, let's do a quick review of the whole process. First, open the RGB Parade, the Vectorscope YUV, and the Luma Waveform, and watch them the entire time. 2. Then adjust color by using the white balance selector and sliding the temperature and tint. 3. Adjust exposure by adjusting highlights, shadows, and whites and blacks. And lastly, micro adjust the contrast and the saturation. All right, so that's about it for the quick color correction tutorial. At some point, I'll do a color grading tutorial as well, so you can really get cooking. All right, let's do the tip. Once you create that perfect color correction effect in Premiere, you can actually save it as a preset. To do this, highlight your clip and go to the Effects Control panel. Scroll down to the Lumetri Color effect and Control-click on it, and scroll down to Save Preset. Give it a name and hit OK. Then you'll be able to find it in the Effects panel under Presets next time you want to use it. Done and done. Okay, so that should help you get your footage looking much better. As always, if you found any of this helpful, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so you know when the next one is out, and I will catch you next time.